Should the Prime Minister be there?
Well,
Should the Prime Minister vote?
Well, I think the whole thing is a very sad episode, and really the report is a very flawed document, and I think MPs who are voting for it are voting really to introduce a sort of lawfare into Westminster for the future, which is going to become quite normal. I also think it's going to make Prime Minister's questions and things like that much less probing than in the past, because now no Prime Minister will ever dare say anything at the dispatch box that hasn't been written down for him by the lawyers in advance. Otherwise he'll say, well, I don't have the answer to that question, so I'll write to the honourable member, which is a perfectly acceptable thing to do. But I think it's going to make scrutiny of the executive much, much harder, because everyone now is going to be watching what they say, because this report has changed the standards effectively. Instead of saying you had to knowingly mislead Parliament, it's just enough to mislead Parliament. Well, Boris admits he misled Parliament. It's the question of whether he was intentionally lying at the time, which is in dispute.
So you don't agree with the former Health Minister, Stephen Hammond, who says that the Tory MP should vote in favour of the committee's findings because it is findings from a committee of his peers, other MPs?
Well, Stephen Hammond, of course, was one of the 21 MPs who voted for the Surrender Act in 2019 and lost the whip. And the only reason he continues to be a Conservative MP is that Boris very graciously gave the whip back to him so that he could stand as a Conservative candidate in the 2019 election. And since then, I'm afraid, Stephen, who's an old friend of mine, has spent his time showing what his understanding of gratitude actually means. Maybe Boris shouldn't have given him the whip back, and then he wouldn't be there to pontificate about it.
In terms of gratitude, of course, it is Boris Johnson's 59th birthday. We don't think there'll be a cake there in the House of Commons. Perhaps maybe there won't be that many Tory MPs celebrating. I mean, this will be, effectively, many say, the curtain call of his political career.
Well, he's not there. He's not a member of the House of Commons, and he won't be in the House of Commons the day he's not a member anymore. Where he's having his birthday celebrations, I don't know. I believe I read in the papers he's going to be at home celebrating his birthday, and happy birthday to him, by the way. I think the idea that, you know, this is all about one person is a terrible mistake. What Boris articulated and in a rather ham-fisted way tried to capture was the fact that there has been a big shift in the way in which the electorate thinks. There's a big shift in the politics of the country, and the parties haven't caught up. In fact, both Starmer and to some extent Sunak are retreating to a sort of core base of ideas which represents what thinking was 10 or 15 years ago. And what they're finding is the electorate really aren't there. There's no enthusiasm for a Starmer government. You'd think that by now there'd be huge enthusiasm for a change of government with the various mishaps.
Forgive me, Lord Moylan, this is not about a Labour government. This is about a Prime Minister who is brought before a committee which he was instrumental in setting up. That committee found that he was deliberately disingenuous, not once but on several occasions.
Your question was about whether MPs thought that this was something effectively they could draw a line under, and this report was going to be the end of it. And I was saying it isn't by any means the end of it, because the change in the electorate and in the views of the voters needs some response from the parties. And what the parties both are doing is retreating to a somewhat, in my view, irrelevant way of thinking that would have had sort of been characteristic of something 10 or 15 years ago. They think by removing Boris, because he grasped that, they can somehow go back to normal. But their normal is way out of date and out of touch with what the electors are thinking. So although you might think you've got rid of Boris, the sentiments which propelled Boris to power and his popularity with the electorate are still there, and there is no drawing a line under it.
So it's all right if MPs continue to lie?
I didn't say that.
Well, a lot of people who are looking at what the MPs will be...
I didn't say that, and I didn't say that, and there is no way that anything I said could lead to that conclusion. And in any event, the question is not about MPs lying, but about ministers lying. That probably doesn't make much difference to you, but it's a crucial distinction in law.
So what do
and
you
no, they shouldn't. But the
what do you understand?
Is, the question, and they...
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what, therefore, do you understand as deliberately disingenuous? What does that mean, then?
Well, I don't believe that's the case. I mean, I simply don't believe the report shows that Boris intentionally misled the House of Commons. He did mislead the House of Commons, he says that, and he says he corrected himself at the first available opportunity. But the question of intentionality hasn't been proven, in my view. And they simply say that, oh, he must have known this, he must have known that. And the sheer one-sidedness of the report is an illustration of how vindictive it is. I mean, in all of these cases, when you have a he said, she said type of argument, there are always two sides to it. There's always some nuance, but there's no nuance in this report at all. It's everything is sort of slam dunk down against Boris. And I don't think the report really is going to withstand scrutiny when historians come to look at it. And let's face it, nobody much now is ever going to look at it until it gets into the history book.
Well, it's certainly going to be looked at today.
So this episode is over.
Yeah, well, certainly it's going to be looked at today and in some detail. So given that, and given what you have just indicated, I hope you can still hear me. Obviously, you might have a problem there with the earpiece.
I missed the first part. Missed the first part. I'm back on.
All right, I was just going to say, given what you've indicated, and perhaps that sentiment is shared by other supporters of Boris Johnson, why is it that so many Tory MPs are giving indications that they will abstain today in any vote rather than coming in to bat for him?
Well, I don't think... Well, he's asked them to abstain, and I don't think, frankly, that that there's any point in turning up. Many of them think they don't want to dirty their hands by voting for a very flawed report.
And not the case that perhaps...
it won't make any difference to the outcome, and there may not even be a vote.
Well, yes, but obviously the suggestion is that he's being told or telling his critics or telling his supporters, rather, not to come and vote because it may well be that he doesn't get that much support in terms of the numbers voting for him.
Well, you can draw that conclusion if you want.
Well, the public will be able to by the votes themselves.
Yeah, as I say, there may not be a vote, and I think a lot of people will abstain if there is a vote. I'm not a member of the House of Commons. I don't know what they're planning to do. But I read there may not be a vote.
Well, Lord Moylan, thank you for bearing with us with the difficulties with the earpiece. I think we got your message loud and clear this end anyway.
Sorry about that.
Thank you very much indeed for your time down there at Westminster on St Stephen's Green. Thank you.